peeing our pants yet? See, it's real simple. You work for me now. You have food, you give it to me. I eat your stuff. But what am I gonna eat now? I simply can't decide. Eeny, meeny, miny, mo. You can breathe, you can blink, you can cry. Hell, you're all gonna be doing that.
Damn!
Perfect. Not so easy stealing food, is it, Negan? If you want to learn to fend for yourself, maybe you should learn to cook and survive through The Walking Dead, the official cookbook and survival guide. The Walking Dead, the official cookbook and survival guide by Lauren Wilson with photos by Yoonhee Kim transports us to the post-apocalyptic world of The Walking Dead with recipes that pay homage to its many characters and survival tips that would make even Daryl proud. This is the first cookbook I've ever seen that also doubles as a survival guide, and I think that blend of culinary creativity and survival insight is such a fun and unique concept. The very first chapter of the book outlines some survival basics that would definitely come in handy in a zombie apocalypse. There are a lot of helpful information on things like starting a fire, finding food, scavenging materials, and of course, cooking. These are actual survival tips that can apply in real-life emergency situations, so if I had to take only one cookbook with me to a deserted island, you bet I'll be taking this one. The survival portion of the cookbook is heavily grounded in reality, so don't expect any tips on how to camouflage and blend in with zombies or how to defend a prison from an invading militia. It's mainly general survival tips with some sprinkling of references to the story. But it's really the recipe sections where the world of The Walking Dead and its characters are really brought front and center. Each recipe is inspired either by a specific character from the story or a specific scene in the show. Each entry starts with a write-up that usually states how that dish is relevant in that particular character's story and adds to that some helpful tips in cooking. I really like the mix of simple and complex recipes. There are some dishes that require only very few ingredients, which would be fitting in a survival situation, but every now and then there are also more complex recipes to represent those times when the survivors have found a settlement and have access to a bit more things than usual and can live it up a little bit. The cookbook is chock full of screen caps from the show, which is great for accompanying all of the nostalgic text and recipes. The food photos are extremely well done. They all have a gritty, rustic, rough around the edges look to them. They really capture the desaturated grayish brown tone of the show, but still manage to make the food look warm and inviting and delicious. The food all look like they're really what the characters ate in the show, and I love that dedication to immersion and authenticity. Speaking of authenticity, one thing to note is that although most recipes are pretty accessible, there are some recipes that call for wild game or ingredients that can be hard to find or expensive to source, so do keep that in mind that those may require some substitutions, but I really love how these were included in here. Those recipes are very unique and really fitting to the theme. Alright, I'm getting hungrier than a walker, so I'm gonna make a 3-course meal from the Walking Dead cookbook to sink my teeth into. In a zombie apocalypse, you might have to try your hand at fishing.
Thank you.
Your fresh catch will be nutritious, but to make sure it's delicious, you might want to try Amy and Andrea's recipe for Campfire fish fry. The recipe calls for 2 pounds of fresh white fish. The cookbook survival section details not only how to catch fish, but also how to scale and clean them. I initially wanted to do that for this video, but I live in a condo and I don't feel like getting fish scales into every nook and cranny of my kitchen, so I just bought some from the grocery store like a spoiled city boy. I'm using cod here. Pat both sides of the fish to get them as dry as possible, then season each side with some salt and pepper to taste. Then we're going to take about half a cup of flour and dredge each piece of fish in them and shake off the excess. Just like that, we're ready for frying. In a large skillet, heat up 2 tablespoons of oil over medium heat. You can use a non-stick pan if you're afraid of the fish sticking, but cast iron or stainless steel will lead to a better crisp. Add your fish fillets to the pan and make sure not to overcrowd. Do them in batches if you have to. If your fish has skin, make sure to do the skin side down first. Let the fish fry for 2 to 3 minutes depending on the thickness of your fillet, then flip to the other side and cook for another 2 to 3 minutes. At this point, I'm noticing that the skin on my fish is a bit paler than I'd like. I was hoping for it to be more golden brown, but instead of leaving it on to fry for longer, I decided to take them out because I fear I'll overcook the fish. Still looks pretty decent though. Set aside the fish and back to the pan, add in half a teaspoon of flour and cook for 15 to 30 seconds until brown. Next, add in a 1/4 cup of fish stock to deglaze any brown bits stuck to the pan. Let it cook for about a minute or 2 to thicken it. Then remove it from the heat and add in a tablespoon of lemon juice and a tablespoon of butter to combine everything together into a sauce. Spoon the sauce on the fish and add some chopped fresh parsley, and you have yourself a super simple dish that highlights your fish that you can pig out on if you wish. Not a seafood fan? Well, if you go hunting with Daryl, maybe he'll fix you up a warm and hearty bowl of his Dixon deer stew. For this, we'll be using 3 pounds of deer meat. The cookbook said that you can substitute with stewing beef, but I wanted to stay true to the recipe and I think deer would be far more interesting. Although I definitely do recommend just using beef because this deer meat was really hard to find and way more expensive. Which is why I'm now going to shamelessly plug my Patreon. If you want to support the channel and be able to vote for the cookbooks and recipes that I'm going to do next, then I invite you to check it out. Thanks for your support. Pat your meat dry and generously season with salt and pepper to taste. Then in a heavy pot, heat up a tablespoon of oil on medium-high and add in some of the meat, making sure not to overcrowd. Cook the meat for 3 to 5 minutes each side until it's brown all around. Remove this from the pot and do the same thing with the rest of the meat and add more oil if needed. Once you're done frying the meat, add another tablespoon of oil to that same pot and cook 2 diced up sweet onions. Fry those up for about 5 minutes until they're soft, then add in 2 cloves of minced garlic and fry those until nice and fragrant. Add to that 3 tablespoons of flour and stir that all together for a couple of minutes. Next, we mix in a tablespoon of tomato paste and let that cook for a minute, and then we're going to turn the heat to high and add in 1 1/4 cups of red wine to deglaze all that delicious brown stuff stuck to the bottom. Bring the meat back to the pot and submerge it in 4 cups of beef broth. Add in a teaspoon of dried thyme and 1 bay leaf and bring it to a boil. Once boiling, turn the heat down, cover, and let it simmer for an hour. After that hour, toss in 3 carrots that's been peeled and sliced and also 2 large potatoes that have been diced. Cover and simmer for another 30 minutes. Finally, add in half a cup of barley with another half cup of beef broth and cook that covered for another 30 minutes. When everything in the stew is soft and tender, add in a half cup of peas and cover and cook for 5 minutes. The wait is over, my dear. It's time to eat some Dixon deer stew. If you're not finding any luck with fish or deer, maybe you can scavenge and forage some protein-rich foods and combine them all together just like Morgan's peanut butter protein bars. Take a large saucepan and over medium heat, mix in half a cup of honey, a 1/4 cup of maple syrup, and half a cup of smooth or crunchy peanut butter. I'm going with crunchy. Stir it all together until smooth and well combined. Then remove it from the heat and add in a teaspoon of cinnamon and let it cool down for 10 minutes before we start handling it. Once the mixture has cooled, add in 3 cups of puffed rice cereal, a 1/4 cup of protein powder, half a cup of chocolate chips, a 1/4 cup of dried cranberries, and a 1/4 cup of salted sunflower seeds. Toss it all together until everything is well combined and evenly coated. Then you're going to spread all of this out on a baking dish that's been lined with some parchment paper, press it flat, and make it even before popping it in the fridge for about an hour or 2 to let it all set. Once it's all set, take it out of the dish and cut them into 12 bars to make a dozen of these grab-and-go peanut butter protein bars before you head on out. It's eating time! Starting with a fish fry, it definitely feels fork tender and for sure tastes like it too. Perfectly light and flaky texture. The exterior isn't as crispy as I'd like, so I would probably work on perfecting that. The sauce here is the star of the show. I love the buttery richness and lemony zing. This is a very simple recipe with minimal ingredients requiring only a few tools, so I can actually see this as a staple recipe that a group of survivors can use in a survival situation, assuming they can scavenge some flour and grow some lemons. This stew is the one I am dying to try. I've never had deer before, so I'm very curious to know how it tastes. And wow, I was very surprised. I was fully expecting it to taste very similar to beef, but slightly gamier, but I was shocked by how different it was. Slow cooking it made it really tender, which is perfect for stew, but it's incredibly lean. Because there's very little fat content, it kind of starts to feel dry and pasty after a few bites. It kind of reminds me of the texture of mackerel, where it's tender but also firm and slightly chewy. It also has a minerally liver-like quality. That's the best way I can explain it. To be honest, I don't really like just eating the meat, but eaten with the potatoes, carrots, and gravy, it's pretty tasty. I feel the softness of the vegetables gives it a much needed moisture and creaminess. I think if I cut the deer in smaller chunks it would have been better. As a stew recipe, this is really solid though, and I love the bitter and slightly floral notes from the red wine. I would make this again, but next time with beef. Now let's try these protein bars. I can't see these as anything but delicious, and yes, they did not disappoint. wonderfully crunchy with lots of peanut buttery goodness. I love the hints of tartness from the cranberries. I actually should have doubled it, it's so friggin' tasty. Probably should have doubled the chocolate chips too. It is super sweet though, since there's a lot of honey and maple syrup. You might want to tone that down if you're sugar sensitive, but I have the taste buds of a 5-year-old, so I like sickly sweet stuff. I'm gonna eat this whole mountain of peanut butter bars for sure. Final verdict for the Walking Dead Cookbook: the ultimate desert island book.